So you're going to come across more of these folks that are probably, I guess you'll see both, but the hypermobile folks are going to end up, the hypermobile folks are going to end up a little more probably in your pain category in my experience, at least early on in their life. They're going to have issues where, joints are dislocated and things aren't quite stacking up the way they need to, and they're starting to have pains. They start to have cartilage failures a little bit earlier in life and such. Whereas the stiffer population that's more hypomobile tends to get through and be a little safer because they're more compact and tight, but they're probably less successful from a performance standpoint in the early going. They're not as fast, or maybe they're not as certainly not as limber. They can't throw something as well, or they can't get in certain positions others can. So they just kind of avoid those things, but they're not really injured as a result of it. So I think in sports we tend to see this hypermobile folks because it's impressive. Like, well, these people can really move, But if it's not tied with the appropriate amount of stability, then we see them at really high injury risks.
So what I always say to those people when you see somebody with too much motion, I always say, well, really good news for you today. You move really well. You've got a lot of motion, but like the old Superman thing, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. Like your responsibility is now to be able to control it, and that's what like the epitome of I think higher performance is good motion, which they've been given, and then the ability to control it, which is what they have to train.
So this is going right into training. I think there's a wonderful academic word called epigenetics. And it has such a place here. So when we think of our DNA factors that we're alluding to here, the stuff that they're born with, this is kind of how you present to the world. Epigenetics is a study of DNA expression. So we might have that built into our DNA. Now, what are we doing about it? Because the real dysfunctions come from a hypermobile person, say 15 years old, hypermobile swimmer. All right, now they're living in an environment that gratifies this long, slender movement and doesn't train stability, but trains flow and long, fluid movements. So you take a hypermobile person and you just double down on that hypermobility, and then you got a dislocator, a chronic dislocator in their shoulders and a weak back and pes planus galore. So every time they squat, their knees buckle. And that's an unfortunate common thing, and that person belongs in the gym. Because of expression of DNA, we can improve the stiffness of their body and potentially kind of push away some of the extreme hypermobility and get them that more stacked feeling so that then they can still perform in their sport but be safe doing it. So we have to train.
But everything is training, so that's the good kind of training, sure. Right? But I've seen plenty of hypermobile folks that sit at a desk for 8 hours a day for 20 years and come in and their thoracic spine is incredibly stiff. That's then another conversation. That's, man, you move great in all these other places, but this is stiff. That's a red flag. Like this, that probably means that this is something we need to attack. So the positions we put ourselves in for extended periods of time are training our body and training our tissue, and our structure will literally adapt around that.
It's interesting too when you think about what these guys, what they do and how they get to the point they're at. These hypermobile folks are funny. These are the ones that they love yoga. Like, yes. They love stretching. The gymnastics, be like, oh gosh, I feel so tight. And they go down and put their palms on the ground. It's like, I've never done that in my life. So, I don't know how you consider that to be such a limitation, because I lived for 40 so years and it's never bothered me for a moment. But this need to stretch feels good, and they love it, right? They crave it almost, right? And then you get someone who's a really stiff person who walks around the gym and the weight room, and they're all jacked and ready to go, and like, let's put some more weight on the bar because they're well equipped for it. And what we really should do is have like a rule that if you're on the stiffer side, you should have to go to yoga, and if you're on the hypermobile side, you should have to go spend time in the weight room, and you're not allowed to cross paths. You can't take the classes, You've got to be in there loading the system. And this is something that Russ has worked a lot on, and Evan as well. And we've put together a training program. So our kettlebell certification we're launching this year is really about this idea of developing a little more tolerance to the tissue, a little more robustness and resilience of that tissue, and the idea of how much and respecting how much time it takes to develop that to really support someone in this more mobile or hypermobile category.